My name is Linda. My late husband Edric was the best thing that ever happened to me. Long story short, he passed away in a motorcycle accident exactly 8 years ago as I'm writing this on April 29, 2016. What I'm about to tell you is something I've blocked out of my mind since it happened, but I think I'm finally ready to open up about it. Edric and I both grew up in Italy. English is actually my second language. He always dreamed of traveling to Greece, but we kept postponing the trip. One of my biggest regrets was not taking time off work one summer to go with him. In late spring of 2018, I decided to bite the bullet and take the trip he had always talked about. Being only 36 years old with no children, I didn't much like the prospect of traveling alone, so I decided to book a cruise, thinking it would be more relaxing. I was actually in luck. Celebrity Cruise Line had a Best of Greece cruise that covered 6 cities: Athens, Santorini, Ephesus, Mykonos, Volos, Thessaloniki, and back to Athens. I tried my best to be excited about the cruise, knowing it was what he would have wanted, but I couldn't help but find the whole thing somewhat melancholy. It just felt wrong to be there without him. Admittedly, I may have gotten a little too wine drunk the first night after leaving Athens, but I felt I was entitled to behave less prudently. After exiting the boat and enjoying the city's offerings, I found myself drinking endless martinis at some nameless bar. That's when I noticed him. Across the bar, there was some 40-year-old looking man with long straight brown hair and an unkempt beard. He wasn't bad looking, actually, but his stare was unsettling. At first, I brushed it off as the wandering gaze of some lonely guy. Maybe he found me attractive. I wasn't going to get offended if he wanted to look at me. After catching his eye a few more times, though, I started feeling unease begin to set in. The way he was glaring at me was just so perturbing. It wasn't seductive or charming like he was trying to flirt or anything like that. It was literally as if he was trying to sear a hole in my face with his eyes. I finished what must have been my 8th drink, paid my tab, and quickly made my way back to the dock. By that night, my memory of that man had completely dissipated. The next city on the docket was Ephesus. My time there was essentially spent the same way, consuming far more alcohol than was acceptable for a woman my age. Other than some fleeting guilt, everything went well in Ephesus. Mykonos was next. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to any of you at this point, but near the end of the day, I unavoidably found myself sitting alone at an outdoor bar. That's when I noticed him. There was a man standing against a light fixture with his arms crossed. I strained my eyes, thinking my mind must have been playing a trick on me. It was unmistakable, though, it was the guy from Santorini. He was too far away for me to tell whether he was looking at me, but his head was tilted in my direction. Oddly, he was wearing the same exact outfit he had worn in Santorini. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Was I being stalked? My palms began feeling clammy, so I nervously rubbed them on my dress as I lowered my head, trying to avoid looking in his direction. I could feel his aura radiating, though, even from that far away. I couldn't help myself. I glanced back up, but he was gone. You might expect my body to have flushed with relief, but I was actually even more anxious. I frantically began looking around, trying to see if he had gotten closer. I didn't feel comfortable walking back to the boat alone, so I ran into a couple that was leaving and made some small talk, then walked back with them. That night, instead of retiring to my stateroom, I decided to explore the boat in hopes of running into that strange man. After scouring the boat in its entirety, I gave up around midnight. The next morning, I got off the boat in Volos, determined to solve this mystery. Instead of venturing into the city, I opted to wait at the gangway. I watched painfully for an inordinate amount of time as person after person made their way off the ship. I didn't miss a single one, but he wasn't one of them. Frustrated, I returned to the ship and spent the rest of the day by the pool. Thessaloniki was the last city. As much as I dreaded it, I had to reconcile the fact that I'd be wasting my vacation if I stayed on the boat. So reluctantly, I got off the ship and tried to enjoy the city. Feeling superstitious, I thought it might be best to avoid bars and alcohol this time around, which I did. Instead, I wandered the streets aimlessly, admiring the architecture and enjoying the weather. And then, as if on cue, there he was again. He was a few streets down in the middle of the road with his arms at his sides. Instead of being afraid, I felt a huge rush of adrenaline-induced confidence start to pour in. I yelled out to him and began walking in his direction. Instead of acknowledging me, he actually turned and ran. It was bizarre. He turned a corner, and I chased after him. I made it to the corner and barely saw him run down another street, and I sprinted to follow him. I turned the same corner, and he had disappeared, nowhere to be seen, like he had evaporated out of existence. I couldn't sleep that night. I was relieved when the ship pulled into Athens, but once I made it back home, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of that man that was weighing on my mind. I whipped out my laptop and started doing research. I wasn't quite sure what to even look for, but I thought recent police reports were a decent place to start. After having no luck, I stumbled upon some missing persons advertisements. I scrolled through page after page, and then I found something. There, in the middle of the page, was a missing person ad for a guy who looked almost identical to the guy who had been following me. I stared, frozen in shock. What was even more disturbing, though, was his name. He had the same first name as my Edric, which was a cruel coincidence. The very first thing I did was call the police and report my sightings. The operator thanked me for my assistance and put me on hold. A few minutes later, she asked me if I was 100% confident in what I had seen. I told her yes. After an uncomfortable pause, she went on to say that they had actually closed that man's case just over a month ago. Apparently, he had been found dead in a boating accident off the coast of Parga, Greece. What's more sinister, though, is that the date of his confirmed death was the exact month and day of my husband's passing, just 2 years later. I hung up the phone, literally shivering. I don't think I've ever been more terrified than I was at that moment. I began feeling dizzy, questioning if maybe I was going crazy, like had I imagined everything. Suddenly, another wave of realization slapped me in the face. The only city I hadn't seen him in, Ephesus, was actually a city in Turkey, not Greece. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I've spent hours trying to rationalize my sightings, and no conclusion I reach makes sense. My niece Kaylee had her wedding in Athens last summer, though, so I had no choice. And like clockwork, there he was again. I only saw him for a split second this time, standing in that same outfit by the bar, head pointed in my direction. To be completely honest with you, there were so many drunk people there that I might have imagined it. Either way, I vowed to never step foot in Greece again. I hope you enjoyed my fun fact. What do you think causes people to snap? Is it stress, jealousy, rage, maybe cabin fever? I don't really have an answer, but you need to listen to this. A few years ago, my boyfriend at the time bought us 2 tickets for a getaway cruise vacation. He had just been promoted in his job, and he decided to splurge and get us first class. It was honestly one of the most luxurious experiences that I've ever had. It sounds corny, but I felt like Rose on the Titanic the way the staff treated us. We were having a great time. We'd see live performances during the day and go dancing in one of the private clubs they had for their exclusive members during the nights. One night, I believe it was the night before the ship was to head back to port in New York, my boyfriend and I decided to go to bed early. We were in our cabin suite. My boyfriend was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, and I was lying on the bed scrolling through Instagram when there was a loud knock on our door. I called out to my boyfriend and asked if he ordered room service. He yelled back that he didn't, and I got up from the bed and went to the door. I was about to open it but decided to look through the peephole instead. I believe this small action was what saved our lives. As I looked through the peephole, I saw a disheveled-looking man standing in front of our door. He was breathing heavily, his eyes were wide, and there were red stains smeared all over him. I didn't quite know what to think as I stared at him. 20 seconds must have passed when he started banging on our door again, but this time much harder. The door handle started to jiggle as he tried to get in, and I yelled for my boyfriend to get over here now. The man was now screaming that he needed to come in and show us something. My boyfriend pushed past me and looked through the peephole. He yelled to get away from our door right now. The man did not listen. He continued to bang on our door, screaming to let him in. He was banging so hard that the edges of the door started to splinter. Terrified that he was going to break in and do God knows what to us, my boyfriend called for security from the cabin phone. We stayed pressed up against the door to prevent him from getting in. When we finally heard other voices outside, we heard security yelling at him to stop what he was doing. I thought there was going to be some big fight and the man would retaliate, but it sounded like he just listened to the security. We could hear him being detained, and we figured it was now safe to open our door. After about half an hour of explaining to security what happened, we soon found out the grisly details of what this man was doing. Only 2 cabin doors down from us was where that man and his wife were staying. They were going to ask her some questions about her husband, but found out she had been stabbed over 40 times in the chest and neck. The man had used an ice pick that was in their cabin freezer. After he mutilated his wife, for some reason, he wandered over to our cabin and was asking to come in. He had the ice pick in his hand when he was knocking, and I'm positive he would have killed me and my boyfriend if I had not looked through the peephole first. The weird thing about this whole story is I remember seeing that man in the breakfast lounge with his wife. They seemed like a normal, happy couple enjoying a cruise vacation. My boyfriend later explained to me that he probably caught cabin fever and just snapped. This experience actually left such a traumatic imprint on me that I was unable to continue my relationship with my boyfriend. Sad, I know, but that's how badly it messed me up. I've since gotten better, but believe me when I say I will never step foot on a cruise ship again. My father invited our entire family on a cruise to celebrate May and his 50th wedding anniversary. May was my grandmother. It was my father, his brother's mom, and aunt with all the grandchildren. There were 10 of us for a 3-night cruise from Miami to Bermuda and back to Miami. My sister and I had never been on a cruise before, nor were our cousins, so we were excited. I was the middle age-wise at 13, my sister was the youngest at 10, and our cousins were 13 and 11. Since we all now lived in different parts of the country, we flew to Miami and met at the ship. We arrived first, so my sister and I explored the ship before everyone else arrived. It was a pretty big ship, but not one of the biggest. I think it had something like 1,000 staterooms, so about 2,000 passengers. There were 10 places to eat, 3 pools and whirlpools, a rock climbing wall, mini golf, a fitness center, an entertainment center like an arcade, and a massage spa. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Don't forget a casino. So we kids had a ton of things to do and ran wild around the ship. Grandpa, May, my dad, Mom, and aunt and uncle mostly played gin rummy and mahjong, a favorite card game of May's. They thought we were responsible enough to stay out of trouble. The first 2 nights, we swam, watched Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the movie theater, and played video games in the arcade. It was on the 3rd and last night that the scary event happened. The adults were playing cards after dinner, and we kids headed out to the upper deck just to watch the ship moving through the stars, which literally rained down on us like a magical world. We sat in the deck chairs and told scary stories, jokes, and stuff like that. Sometime around 12:40, we decided to go to the arcade. Now, it's a little surprising with something like 2,000 people on board. We were the only people on the deck, which was like a ghost town. When we got to the arcade, we had it entirely to ourselves. There was just one lone figure sitting on one of the deck chairs near the railing. As we passed him, I saw it was a very skinny and tall man with stringy hair, wearing a coat and a winter cap. I couldn't tell whether he was staring out to sea or asleep. It was too dark to see any other features. But he didn't look like the other passengers on the ship. We all felt a little uncomfortable walking past him. I was the last to walk past him, and I kept an eye on him the whole time, but he didn't move. As I passed him and breathed a sigh of relief too soon, I heard him speak from behind me. A second after, it wasn't like he spoke, it was more like he mumbled. I turned around, and he stood and walked in my direction. He was tall sitting in the chair, but when he stood up, he was taller than any man I've ever seen. He was ludicrously tall. He had to have been almost 7 feet. I don't know how tall, just really tall. My heart pounded, and I was scared to death. My sister and cousins were already in the arcade, and the door had shut. I was staring at this creep by myself. As he got closer, he pulled his coat around his neck, which was super skinny with a huge Adam's apple. When he was about 5 feet from me, he stopped, stooped over, took his hand out of his coat pocket, and, in an outstretched arm, held a voodoo doll. "Do you want to buy this?" he asked. I gasped, "No," and turned and ran away. When I entered the arcade, everyone was already at a game. I chose Jurassic Park to play and quickly forgot about my scary encounter. I wish this story had ended there, but it didn't. As I played the video game, I heard the door open and felt the sea air blow across me. I turned to look, and the creepy voodoo man walked in. I instantly went to everyone and said, "It's time to go." We went to the lounge where the adults played cards and chatted with them briefly. They then gave each of us a hug and a kiss and set off to bed. We went down to our stateroom, and the adults played card games. We returned to our room without seeing the creep from the deck, got into our PJs, and curled up on the bunks to sleep. It didn't take long, and all of us were sound asleep. But at some time after 1 o'clock, my sister got up to use the toilet. When she turned the light on, she screamed bloody murder. There, in a chair, sat this strange tall man. When she screamed, he stood up, and all of us were up. I don't know how it happened, but he tripped on his own feet and fell into the bathroom. My older cousin slammed the door and placed the chair in front of it to barricade the monster in. Our parents, now in the cabin next to ours, heard the commotion and screams and raced over. We told them there was a scary man in the bathroom. They called ship security, who came and handcuffed the man. They placed him in a cell especially for criminal behavior. It turned out the man was not a passenger on the manifest. They don't know how he got on board without being spotted, but he did. It was suspected that he had mental disorders when they attempted to question him. He was locked in the cell below deck for his and everyone's safety. When we arrived back at port, the police came aboard and took him away. I don't know if it was to a jail or a mental hospital. How he managed to find our stateroom is a mystery. How he got into our room is my fault. I didn't lock the door. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.